Katie here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And as promised, I'm shooting this homemade baking powder video so you can know how to make your own and make your decision based on what's best for you, on how you're going to blend it and what you're going to use in it. When it comes to making your own baking powder, really all you need are two ingredients. And right here what I have is baking soda and cream of tartar. And as far as purchasing these ingredients, when it comes to getting baking soda, there's been this misconception that you got to look for a baking soda that is aluminum free. Well, baking soda is naturally aluminum free. Where the aluminum comes into play is when you're talking about store-bought baking powders. And the reason why is because baking soda is a base and cream of tartar is an acid. And anytime you combine these two, be it in a liquid form, which is going to cause foaming, think baking soda and vinegar combined, or if you're talking about powders, then they're going to clump, and they tend to clump very hard. So if you've ever made your own like dishwasher tablets, you mix an acid with a base and they do turn hard. And that's why. It's because the combination of the two. We're looking at the same thing with these two. And so when you're talking about commercial baking powders, aluminum is often added because it's a drying agent. So it prevents the clumping. But a lot of us know that aluminum is one of the causes, the constant exposure, be it you're baking with aluminum pans, you're getting it in your air, you're getting it in your foods. This is one of the causes leading to Alzheimer's and certain other diseases. So we want to try to avoid aluminum as much as possible. So not only is making your own baking powder going to be healthier for you, it's actually cheaper as well, and it's super easy. Now, I'm not actually making my own baking powder anymore. I'm just using the two ingredients. So by keeping them separate all the time, it's just as easy to use, and I keep them right next to each other. And yes, you can mark your jars if you want. I just know which is which. So by doing it this way, I don't have to worry about clumping, and I don't have to worry about adding any other ingredients. So if you're wanting to make up a batch of baking powder to save you the time of having to open two different containers, which really doesn't take that much longer, then you would want to add some kind of starch. Now there's pretty much any kind of starch you can use, but the two I recommend the most would be either organic tapioca starch or organic arrowroot powder. I use both equally. It just depends on what I'm getting the best deal on at the time. Currently, I have a lot of arrowroot powder on hand, but Anthony's Goods has a really good price on organic tapioca starch, and so I'm starting to get that again now. But again, they can be used equally. So let's talk about ratios when you go to use these. So if you're going to mix up your baking powder beforehand and keep it in a jar, then what you'll want to do is you're going to want to go 2 parts of the cream of tartar to 1 part of baking soda, and then 1 part again of your starch, whichever one it is you use. So you're going to have a 1, 1, and 2 ratio. Then you just blend that really well and keep it in a jar with an airtight lid on it until you're ready to use it. Now, if you're using it like I'm using it here, and you're not wanting to add that starch, then the first 2 ratios still apply. 2 parts cream of tartar to 1 part baking soda, and that's going to give you what you need. So when you're looking at most recipes, your standard recipe for biscuits, pancakes, quick breads, many of these kind of things, cornbread, the typical amount of baking powder you're adding is a tablespoon. Well, we know that there's 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon, so that makes it really easy to divide this up. So in that case, I've got, for it to equal a tablespoon, 2 teaspoons of the cream of tartar and 1 teaspoon of the baking soda. And that will give you a tablespoon to put in whatever recipe you're using. And that works really good. Now, here was the problem I had earlier. So I shot a video about, I don't know, a year ago, 11 months ago or so, where I decided to make the baking powder, leaving out the starch, thinking that I'm baking enough that I should work through a pint-sized jar fast enough that it shouldn't be a problem, not thinking at the time about the acid and the base. Not actually, just wasn't even thinking about cream of tartar being an acid, which, by the way, if you want more information on cream of tartar and what it is and its benefits, I'll link to that video that I did this last year down below. But then it suddenly made sense why I immediately had my stuff clump up before I could even work through the jar much. Now, if that happens to you and you don't want to bother to keep trying to break that up, those two ingredients make a great cleaning product. And it's better to do that than to worry about trying to break those pieces up really small, because sometimes it can be hard to get them broken up well enough so that you don't end up with clumps in your breads of whatever kind. And yes, you could probably use a mortar or pestle, throw it in the blender and process it up. But I decided to just turn that into cleaning powder and not have to keep worrying about that, because you would have to do that like every time you go to use it. So this to me is the best way. Or just go ahead and add that starch if you want it a little bit faster and easier to use. Oh, and then one more thing I wanted to add about using these two is that when you'll have some, like usually you'll see this in cookie recipes, such as the pumpkin cookies recipe, and that is instead of a tablespoon of baking powder, it might say a teaspoon of baking powder and a teaspoon of baking soda. So basically what's happening is you're just raising the ratio of the baking soda when you're adding baking powder and baking soda separately. So what I did in that case is I did actually use equal amounts of each. So I did do a 1-to-1 ratio on that. So I did a teaspoon of baking soda and a teaspoon of cream of tartar, and they turned out perfect. They were great. And those ones were even the gluten-free ones that I was making, and they turned out fluffy and soft, and everybody loved them. So if you're looking at a recipe like that where it's got a baking powder plus baking soda, just consider using equal amounts and then see how that turns out. So far, that's worked really good for me, and so much easier, in my opinion, to keep them separate and then just take what you need out of each, because in the long run, to me, it's saving time in either having to add a third ingredient to the initial batch or having to worry about it clumping and then having to break it up. So this is going to be the best way to go, and then it's just so much cheaper to stock up on these ingredients separately, especially with the rising cost of baking powder, where I can go to Costco and get baking soda and I can get a big bag for like $8. And then cream of tartar is typically going to be more expensive. That's usually what raises the cost. But you can still get a pretty good price if you buy it in bulk. So what I have is now, I've bought a few different brands over the years, but now I'm getting Anthony's cream of tartar. Anthony's goods, they're all non-GMO, US based, and I am really happy with them. They have a good price. Another good place to look for something like that would be, and also for your baking soda, would be going to Azure Standard, which I'll put a link to that down below. So I'll put a link to Azure Standard as a whole so you can do some shopping around in there. But I'll also put a link to the Anthony's cream of tartar. You're avoiding aluminum and you're saving money by just making it your own, and whichever way works best for you, and with whichever starch works best for you. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video on making your own homemade baking powder, and thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.